I'm understanding that what you would like to do at this point, because we've spent a lot of time on the human factors and on that sort of thing, is to now to switch to maybe a little more process.
Yeah, we're moving into the tasks in the exam content outline that step away from the human factors and into the technical parts of project management. But this first discussion is not in the charts and metrics and analysis part. It still is looking at a strategic point. And I thought, since it was the first task, it would be a good transition point for us to go. It's talking about the relationship between urgency and value. And I have a really good example of this. Once upon a time, I was working in the silicon industry, manufacturing silicon. And I was working in sales and marketing, and I was doing a lot of conferences, and those were basically short projects, 6 months at the very most. And I had an expectation. I'd been working for 7 years, working with major corporations, and I was really big on myself because I was helping, make multi-billion-dollar decisions. And here I was with a little marketing activity, and I delayed a decision. And I didn't think big of it. It was just basically, inconsequential. It's a little conference we're going to do, just 3,000 people. And my supervisor flipped out. He said, "What did you do? That ruined everything. Just you bringing that up in the meeting. We have to redo our plans and our strategy." And he chewed me out for about 2 hours. And I realized this is not his problem. This was my problem that I'd created. And it's because I didn't understand that, this was an inconsequential thing for me. And I was just bringing it up as a side discussion, not even a topic. And I hadn't focused on what he really wanted out of the work, and also what the client wanted out of the work too. And so I had missed the target. Now, my corporation was notorious for, number one, saying, "Go forth, do wonderful things at the end of the week. We'll check in on you. And if you do great, we'll celebrate. And if you do poorly, you're on your own." So it was a meritocracy, but it wasn't a perfect meritocracy, but it was better than anything else that I'd worked in. So I was enjoying the work, and I was floored until 2 years later, after thinking about this almost night after night. This was a tragedy for me. I realized this was my fault, and I created this because I didn't realize that there was a value connected to that urgency, and that was not my urgency that needed to be protected. It was the urgency of my supervisor, my organization, my client, my project, and that's where I failed.
So if I were to sum up what you just said in terms of what we'll be talking about today, the correlation between urgency and value doesn't necessarily mean within yourself. It could be your urgency, someone else's value. In fact, it's probably more often that way.
Yeah, and one of the things that I learned at that point was to get rid of my ego. The project is not me. It's not about me. It's about a deliverable, and it's not my deliverable. It's not even the team's deliverable. I'm doing it on the behalf of somebody else. And from that point on, I became a manager of work that actually was a steward. I was from then on, I was Batman's butler, and I was happy with that role. And that really served me well. That mistake was horrible, and I hated going through it, but it actually pointed me in a direction that I cannot actually talk about enough.
In my experience, also similar to what you were just talking about, in my experience with working with end user organizations, it's amazing to me how often I had to pull in, for example, during user acceptance test, the phrasing "your system" often would come from the mouths of the testers, that is, testers for the user organization, in speaking to the developing organization or the system integrator. So if you think about that, if I'm a user and I'm telling the system integrator, your system isn't working, I have not taken any ownership for that. And as a result of that, I'm not yet sensing the value to my organization. And I can't tell you how many times I've had to pull in, for example, my entire team of user acceptance testers as an advisor to that organization, and offering the fact that you need to talk in terms of our system, my system, the system that I am going to say is working so that the 4,000 people, depending on my user acceptance testing in the field, will be able to use this system with integrity. And so, yeah, so I can see exactly what you're saying. The value has to be kind of educated in to the organization sometimes.
Yes. Oh, yes. And again, we're not talking about an issue here that has to do with the project or the technology. This is an issue of human factors. Even though we're going into process discussion, this is all about people.
Well, and I dare us, even when we're talking pure process, not to always lapse into human factors, because we somehow we both have an interest in the people side of the equation. So
yeah. Oh yeah. And for a good reason too. So when we're on this track, you said that urgency and value have a correlation. How do you see them connected? How do you see them related?
well, I think there's a lot of different ways, and certainly as an independent contractor, and I spent much of my career as a system integrator. So if you look at it from that, the correlation of, for example, if the client through their procurement documents puts a sense of urgency on me, even though I won the bid, but they put a sense of urgency on me and my team that is, say, fictitious. And I say fictitious in terms of it's not realistic. So if they put that sense of urgency on me and my contract requires me to meet those demands, what's my quality going to look like if I'm pushed into delivering something that I haven't had the opportunity to fully vet or fully test? So that's one correlation on the negative side. Urgency can create a lack of value if it ends up creating a lack of quality.
Yeah. So urgency always has a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. Getting things done quickly or getting things done earlier always has a reason or purpose. Now, I'll either know what that purpose is and I'll support it, or I won't know what that purpose is. It's not that I won't support it. It's I'm going to figure out why my worldview is different from what's going on here, because that's a piece of information, and every piece of information gets me to be a better manager of this environment.
So using that example that I just gave you, I'm going to give you a couple of real life examples that happened to me, for example. How many times can I use the word example in a sentence? Now, if I think of a situation, let's say advising a government department, a lot of times their urgency is created by something called July 1st or June 30th or October 31st, which is the budget cycle end. And so by fictitious or unrealistic deadlines, they may be imposed simply because the money runs out. That's kind of the negative side, and we deal with that. But I'll tell you, I had a situation where during the downturn of 2008, where there was a lot of people losing jobs and losing homes and having to use public assistance after their unemployment insurance ran out, we were putting in a system that dealt with the public assistance clients of a major state. And what happened was our CIO, that is the state CIO, was reading the newspapers and kind of looked ahead 6 months and realized that people who had lost their jobs, who were on unemployment insurance, suddenly this huge bubble of people were going to come into his department's offices to seek for temporary public assistance until they could find their new job. our system that we were putting in at the time was not ready. So the urgency of that huge bubble of population coming to use their services created an urgency. And in this case, it was positive because we were able to get our heads together and come up with what you might call a minimum viable product, shall we say, so that we could get something into the field offices so that when this deluge came, we could handle the extra people coming forward. And it worked. But had we not had that urgency and that forewarning, we would have been caught completely not ready for that human tragedy.
Yeah. Oh, certainly. And the thing is, if this is a major initiative, you're handling whether it's a positive or negative event with the same calm, curious, and very careful analysis done in a timely manner. This is tricky. It's tricky to keep your head clear and keep your emotions in check as you're going through this, because I'm like you. On a Friday afternoon, 3 p.m, I don't want to hear that we need to have a meeting right now and it's going to take us into 7, because we're going to have to switch gears.
In a situation like this, demanded collaboration between all parties. And the minute we had that collaboration, now we're back to the human factors. But the minute that we had that collaboration, we had the best and brightest minds coming up with a solution that truly saved the day.
Yeah, it's all about the consensus, and it's important for us to actually say, once again, there's something new here. There's a change, and we don't have any influence over their change. What are we going to do? And oftentimes I've had project teams that you have to sort of, guide them, influence them, and even, tell them that there's no choice. We have to work through this. The only way to get through these situations are get into the other side of the decision. This is part of the joy and the struggle of being part of a big project.
Well, and let me take this to a slightly different angle, because I'm aware that a lot of our listeners would be employed by their organization in the IT organization. So in other words, the end users who will be benefiting from the new system and the IT organization who's developing the new system are all part of the same company. So there you have probably less artificial pressure because of budget deadlines demanded by organizational structures than you could have within an organization that sort of says, okay, if I'm going to put in this new system, what are the factors that I need to employ? What's my sense of urgency? And at this point, I think for our IT listeners who come from within an IT organization, the important part here is to insist that IT is at the table when negotiating deadlines and functional requirements and the like for a new system to be implemented within that organization.
Yes. It's a reality check. And being in IT for years, I've realized I was never going to get my way. But just being part of the decision making gave me a sense of control and confidence that I needed to actually go back to my team and say, this is the way we're going.
Yeah. So you mentioned team. What are some of the factors, let's say, that you would employ, or some of the strategies you might employ to take that sense of urgency? Because you are a senior person on the project. You've just received word on high from either the CEO or the major sponsor. How do you now take that sense of urgency that has been put into you and inculcate that, shall we say, into the team?
Yeah, it's a influence situation and a negotiation situation. It's actually much like a captain of a ship saying, here's the storm. We're not going to direct the storm. The storm's coming at us.
Yeah.
And I can actually pull all of you guys together, but you guys have to help me figure this out. You all have a little piece in this, and you all have your pieces of smart. and let's get all of our pieces of SMART engaged onto that whiteboard so we can figure out what the best way forward is.
And that could even include personal vacations. People have prepaid $2,000 or $3,000 for a vacation that they would be at, that they might lose. So that has to go on that same whiteboard.
Yeah. This is not just a technical or a process discussion, like we said earlier. This is a human discussion, because we're actually not just talking about changing work, we're changing people and people's lives. And that's what gets hard.
Yeah.
My supervisor in that situation said, no, it's all about the work. I'm not looking at the human being, and I cannot fault him for that. Okay. But at the same time, if I were in this situation, knowing what I know now, I would have handled that in a little different manner, where actually we would engage together in a solution that we could actually use that would make it more successful.
Yeah. The example I used before with people coming off unemployment insurance and then wanting temporary relief through public assistance until they found their next job. Part of our appeal at that point to the development team to develop this minimal viable product and get it out, into production. Part of the strategy was the altruistic approach. Folks, what we do here is important to the lives of people who have lost their jobs. And, to a certain extent, that also motivated people to make sure that they were thinking of all of those people who would benefit from their work today at the point that their unemployment insurance would run out. So sometimes even the altruistic, you don't think of everything, right? But sometimes even the altruistic approach can appeal to your development team.
Finding one factor in the entire room that people can gravitate towards and get behind. That's the smoothing activity in resolving conflict. And that's a beautiful example of smoothing.
What do you think about rewards and recognition to help get your team established with a sense of urgency?
I think rewards are temporary.
Yeah.
And I think recognition is a necessity, not just for getting people to go above and beyond what they do, but just to get them to do work on a regular basis. Treating people as human beings and individuals. I had an experience of this week with my class. It was funny because I have my current classes over the last 6 months are very, they reflect the confusion and discord we're feeling in society in all sectors right now. And the students come in a state of confusion and frustration and even sometimes anger, and they're not able to express this. And when I create a collaborative environment in the class, all of a sudden their emotions get expressed, and they don't have the self-awareness or emotional intelligence yet to actually maintain decorum. And so I have to actually give them, number one, that structure until they can do it themselves. And number two, I have to give them an example so they can actually follow my behavior. And it usually happens in the first 3 days of class. And then the next 2 days, I start getting whispers in the chat from students saying, Tim, I've never experienced anything like this. How did you know how to do this? What did you do here? And can you help me with this situation? And I've always had that, but for some reason right now, it's explosive. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, big ego Tim is great. No, every time now I see that, I see there's a great need for this.
There's a hunger.
A great need. There's a demand. There's a demand. Now, getting back to this whole understanding of value and urgency, they are much more deeply connected than we realize. Finding one common thread that everybody can get behind is how we can make those 90-degree turns that you and I have been discussing, the 90-degree turns that urgency demands,
Yeah.
finding that value statement. Now, where do you come up with value statements? You said, again, appeals to the emotions, appeals to the logic, appeals to the appeals to the ethics. This is the right thing to do. Where else do you find these in the moment value statements you can actually get people to rally behind?
So I'm going to answer that question by taking us completely out of IT.
Great.
My wife and I run an Airbnb. Well, I shouldn't call it Airbnb because it's a short-term rental location.
Uh-huh.
And we've been very, very successful. We've had pretty much, in terms of our recognition from our guests over the last 6 years, have been pretty much all 5s out of 5s. And I think the reason we were successful in that area, and this is getting to the answer to your question, is because we put ourselves into the chair or into the sleeping accommodation of our guests. We looked around the kitchen. What would we like to see if we were staying here? We looked in the bathroom, all of that sort of stuff. So from my perspective, I put myself into the chair of that developer, of that analyst, of that trainer, of that OCM person. And when I understand what it takes for them to do their job well, then I create the environment for them to be able to do their job well. So again, I put myself into their shoes, basically.
That is really interesting, because I do a similar thing in one of my major projects. I'm just now putting together some marketing content for a proposal, and it's starting to get a lot of recognition, right? And I can actually attribute it to one conversation we had in the end of 2021. This project is a proposal for a type of community that's self-sustaining. And it can be resilient, and it can respond to the changes of climate and changes of demographics and changes to other things. So it can be self-sustaining for an ongoing basis. And we were talking about, how do you do that when nature changes every 200 years and nature does really big flip-flops? And how can we make that resilient? And I was just, just being goofy. And I said, well, what if nature is one of the stakeholders? What if we actually include nature in the decision-making table? What if we appoint someone who is nature's advocate in our decisions in the community and in the development of the community? What does that look like? And all of a sudden, urgency and value is not just from the design, from the profits, from the investments, from the, keeping people a home over their heads. It's always also a collaborative environment where nature itself has a voice.
That's very creative.
And again, it's these little tiny things. I have to say, it's inspiration. I don't know where these come from, but the moment that happened, all of our discussions, all of our comments, all of our decisions went in that direction. Who can we get to the table to help us with this solution? How can we pull people together?
Excellent creativity, I think. And especially when you value those ideas that just kind of come out of the blue and they're worthwhile.
Yeah. And it's all about curiosity. Even and that's what I learned over time. Even the silliest questions lend themselves to inspiration and innovation.
And that's why on our teams, often we use round robin kind of brainstorming techniques. And we don't dismiss anyone's ideas ever. We jot them all down. And it also, I think, in terms of what we're talking about, adding urgency, if you give everyone a voice, sometimes as simple as a brainstorming session, people will be glad to throw out their ideas, and then we see what sticks. And people now they have a stake in the game because it's their ideas that were considered and some of their ideas that will be implemented.
Get people to invest in the work through ideas and voting. And both of those is where we get that motivation and we generate that responsibility and accountability. It's simple. It's so simple.
It's simple, but it's not easy. Isn't that what they say?
That's right. That's
So
right.
the other thought is, if we want to really get down to brass tacks, how would you apply, say, something like time boxing to create a sense of urgency in the team?
So this is a trick, okay? Time boxing is a tool in Scrum and Agile that says, I don't have a duration, but let's put an artificial duration in place, just as a pretend benchmark. And when we get data, we'll refine it to a real estimate, right? And we have problems with that because we're human beings. We want to be as accurate with our estimates as possible, but sometimes in order to start work, we can't even have estimates. So we have to have that sense of time, because if you don't have that finite boundary, you think you have all the time in the world, which means to the end of the universe.
Yeah.
So you have to do that, and you have to do it in a fair manner. You have to do it in such a way that says we're going to make best use of the time we have. We probably have a little more or a little less, but we got to get the work done. So let's set our meetings 10 to 15 minutes, or let's set our meetings to an hour, whatever we agree on. And then if they don't reach their objective in time, we're going to actually treat the results of those meetings fairly, and we're going to make our estimates for future meetings accordingly. And that's good time boxing, using it, number one, to generate that sense of urgency. We don't have enough time in the world. And number two, to also create that artificial benchmark that we know we're going to change.
Yeah. I just did this practically in my own experience. We had purchased an existing home. My wife and I downsized into a smaller home. And the previous owner had laid a brick sidewalk along one side of the house. But he had laid it in the dirt, and it was all heebie-jeebie. And for our friends who are not American or Western, heebie-jeebie means it's all crooked and trip-worthy. So what I did, I kept looking at that, and I had this picture in my mind of what this magnificent brick sidewalk would look like when I tore it up and redid it. And this picture in my mind was there, and it kept me motivated, but I wasn't actually doing it. And so months went by with nothing happening. And then I decided, hey, wait a minute, the picture in my mind is no longer satisfying. I want to be able to walk on this new sidewalk. And so I time boxed. I said, every morning during the cool of the day, I'm going to get up and I'm going to do 7 rows of bricks. And when I finish 7 rows of bricks, I will reward myself with a nice breakfast. What's interesting is suddenly I made progress beyond anything I imagined. But sometimes I was so motivated, 7 rows became 14 rows, and I accelerated my schedule. So I think this time boxing is a wonderful motivational tool because you see results as you move along.
Yeah, and one of the other mistakes we make with time boxing is, like I said, with this accuracy and precision in our estimates, when we're doing work we've never done before, we think we must be perfect.
Yes.
And there's no way to do work you've done before perfectly. And so you have to realize a lot in Agile activities is the embracing the fact that we're not going to get it right, but we're going to start and we're going to actually agree to celebrate course correction, so that, like you said, 7 rows was a great benchmark, but often you'd find that was not a true estimate, and that's perfect.
Yeah.
And it can work the other way too, and you learn not to feel bad. Yeah, it's 5 rows. And here's why it's 5 rows.
Exactly. Yes.
And this is where one person doing the work might actually struggle. But when a group of people get into agreement, you get that consensus running, you start having that confidence in embracing mistakes in a certain way.
And just as you were talking, my mind was racing because I can hear my colleagues from my past company and from my past work experience saying, why doesn't he just hire somebody to do it? Because I will tell my doubters right now, because I want to get my hands dirty and I want to see my creativity in play.
See, that's your value.
I have a trick question for you. No, it's not that. I've had clients say, in terms of expressing what they need out of an IT project, and you've heard this, they want it faster, they want it better, and they want it cheaper. Faster implying the urgency, better and cheaper implying the value. Cheaper, not cheaper in terms of a poor job, but cheaper in terms of how it affects their budget.
Yeah. It's the old triple constraint of cost, scope, and schedule. Yeah. And I lead my students through this exercise. The first thing, and this is not my idea, I was actually taught this from my consulting teacher. And he said, well, whenever your client gives you something, say thank you, because it's a gift. And they've just given you something, information, right? You now know more. Now you don't like that information, but it's information. So you're in a better position. Now what you can say is, please select two, right? Because the laws of the physical universe say that if you define two, by defining two, you are also defining the third.
Yeah, if you define two, you can't have the third. So if I want it faster and better, it won't be cheaper.
Right.
If I want it faster and cheaper, it probably won't be better. And if I want it better and cheaper, it certainly won't be faster. So yeah, you can pick two and the third. And it's a fun education because a lot of clients expect kind of that from
well, and this is why integration was brought into the project management body of knowledge as the first section. This integration means that we have constraints or limiting factors, and they're not just going to limit the project, they're going to limit each other. And this is what a job of a project manager really is to do, to actually observe and analyze all the spinning plates, but have the plates spinning all at the same time.
Yeah.
Now, there's two things that this brings up. Number one, we're not just talking about scope, schedule, and cost.
Right.
Because we have all these other multidimensional constraints. And second of all, we're going to have to prioritize. And this is reality speaking. And many times directors say, I don't care about prioritizing. You're going to get it right, which means this is what it has to be. And that's where we have to say, okay, here are your options. What do you want to see? And my hardest clients were the ones who didn't understand the problem that they were bringing to me. So most of my interviews with early potential clients was, what's the real problem are you solving? And when they understand the problem, it's either a time or a scope or a budget that they can wrap their hands around, because they're going to solve that problem one way or another.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about it, let's say taking the situation of putting a man on the moon, or sending a man to Mars. I shouldn't say man, I should say person, sending a person to Mars. The safety and on all of the planning that goes into that suggests that there's a high value on the price of that human life, for those human lives. Therefore, there is less of a price on the urgency. Now, when President Kennedy did this, there was an urgency in terms of beating the other nations to that end result. But nonetheless, I think they would have scrubbed that mission had they put people in danger, I believe,
Yes.
because the value of the human life was much more than the urgency of meeting that 10-year goal or whatever it was.
Yes, yes, indeed. In fact, let's actually pivot into that discussion. What role does urgency play in actually influencing value? We know they're correlated, but does actually urgency have any influence on value?
I think it does. Certainly speaking from my experience, a sense of urgency caused us to stop. Now there's a discrepancy. A sense of urgency made you stop. Yes, we stopped. We got our heads together. We thought about things. We planned things. We threw out ideas. For example, a lot of times we'll come up with a prototype or a proof of concept, because in doing something that's that practical, we can show the end result of what's possible. And so therefore, just by putting our heads together to come up with a prototype can save a lot of time on the far end of, say, struggling through a design that you're not quite sure of. So I think in that situation, urgency, thoughtfulness, and a practical way of implementing a solution to the problem is the result of that sense of urgency.
Let's actually get even more fundamental. Let's just go to, the basement, human behavior itself. Value for value. If the value is the same amount, if I can get it sooner, it's going to have higher value. I want it now is a very fundamental human behavior. It's built into our survival mechanism.
Oh yeah.
It's like I have a book, right? I order a book. And one of the things I have to look at is, do I want that book in 3 or 4 weeks, or do I want that book in 2 days? And what am I willing to sacrifice in order to get that in place? And one of them is, I'm going to have to sacrifice, saving a bunch of money. And so when I talk about urgency or getting something sooner, value for value, people, if you have 2 identical projects or 2 identical proposals, and one gets the solution out sooner, people are going to perceive that as, I'm going to like that one a little bit more.
Well, and we use the term in IT development, we use a term called quick wins. And I think that really works well with Agile, because there's a lot of times I can look at the scope of the solution that we're trying to implement, or that we will be implementing. And by looking at that scope, I can say, if I can deliver these 3 items, these 3 epics sooner, and the client can start using them sooner, they will suddenly value that a lot more, even though there's more to come. Now they're anticipating the more to come.
And that's where you're getting into the realm of minimum viable product, the amount of functionality I'm willing to accept at an earlier moment. Basically, what can we live with, and then what can we build up behind in subsequent releases?
Well, I think you and I had a conversation. Remind me again in terms of just even the development of the smartphone.
Yes. That's where the product owner comes to you and says, Tim, business decision makers and I came up with a great idea. We're going to have a basic smartphone release so we can actually get some feedback. And not only that, people always want a new phone. And then we're going to release the phone with better memory. And then we're going to release the phone with a better camera. And then we're going to release the phone with lots of apps. So not only are we going to get feedback along the way, but we're going to actually, get people what they want at an earlier moment. Even though that basic phone is just good for phone calls and text messages. If that's what they want, we're going to get it out to them.
Well, and I was even thinking, remember the early days of text messaging when it was introduced? First of all, it was in your hands. You could send it to another person, but it was like, I think it was 3 characters per key or something like that. So sometimes you had to hit a key 3 times to get a letter out.
Oh my, I remember that.
But now you pick up your smartphone, you hit the microphone button and you speak your text message.
Well, and on top of that, you basically find people who are online either through Teams or WhatsApp, and you say, do you have 3 minutes to talk? And all of a sudden you're face to face with somebody. And it's amazing. And these capabilities were not planned in. It was like, hey, how can we do Zoom here? Well, WhatsApp does part of what Zoom does. And this Microsoft stuff is doing part of what that does. And they're building on earlier releases constantly. And that's what innovation is. It's taking things apart and putting pieces together that you've never done before. And this is what we're really good at as human beings.
Well, and I'm holding up now my Apple phone. Now, this has incredible, I mean, the camera is better than most SLRs, right? It's so if I look at this piece of hardware, very small, had the developers of this product put all of this on the drawing board 10 years ago, it would never have been developed.
No, and not only that, people would have not have gotten behind it.
Exactly.
There was no way that people could agree, right? Yeah. And we see this. I listen to a lot of influencers who built multi-million-dollar corporations, right? And they say that, you know, humans can only do so much in a day and so much in a week. And as you progress, as you develop, you don't see those little tiny pieces add up. You only see those pieces add up and make these world-changing paradigm shifts in the 3-year, 5-year, and 10-year. And so there's a lot of that little tiny trudging that you have to do. And this is going back to, you know, your big systems. This is your bailiwick right here. It's the little tiny wins that actually add up to the big capabilities.
Absolutely. So at the same time that we're talking about how urgency can create value, much like that example, I think the iPhone is probably one of our better examples when talking about something like this. On the other side of that coin, does urgency ever create risk?
Yes. Oh, I love this idea. Urgency for urgency's sake. It's like quality for quality's sake, right? That's where a project gets pear-shaped. We got to get this out. Why? Because we got to get it out. Because the more we do, the better we are. And that's the mindset that General Motors and Ford had in the 1940s. And that's why they wouldn't listen to W.E. Deming and Peter Drucker and the others. They said, no, volume, 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 volume. We don't have time to talk to you. We're solving volume problems. We're not solving quality problems. And that mindset almost broke the automotive industry in the U.S.
Well, as I heard the story, and I'm thinking this is more real than myth, until one of those Detroit executives went to Los Angeles and saw all of the small non-gas burning very light gas burning cars running around the freeways that had come over from Japan. Until they saw that, they didn't understand how deeply mistaken they were in that whole volume situation.
So we were talking about the whole sense that urgency can go pear-shaped. So my students have a lot of this. They understand that their supervisors are asking them to hit goals and objectives that they know technically are not feasible, and yet they don't have the terminology or concepts to debate and actually argue in defense of the teams. And when you start rushing people, they're going to start making mistakes. So the question is, this is normally a quality question, but this also talks about urgency too. How much urgency should I involve in the decision making in my project? And I've figured this out for myself, and I've tested it on many of my students, and it seems to work well right now. It's a benefit to cost. It's basically saying, what is it going to cost us to be urgent, and what are we going to receive from it? And if that formula does not balance out to the benefit side, why are we pushing it? Give me a reason. I want to have a reason to do it too, but here's everything that needs to change. Help me make this decision. And having that attitude and mindset has actually helped me more, not making the decision to be urgent or not, but actually to gain the trust to create these conversations that can potentially make the work better.
Well, and the other side of that coin too is, what's it going to cost me not to be urgent?
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, you're exactly right.
I come from the world of fixed price projects. And so if as a result of my team's issues, I cannot deliver on time, every month that goes by is costing me because I'm still employing people. We're still trying to get the project done, but there is a fixed cost to this project. And so every month I delay, it goes to the bottom line in terms of reducing our profits.
And this comes to the constant course correction mindset that we want to embrace.
Yeah.
What's the perfect solution and what's the worst possible outcome, right? And understanding that those are the boundaries within which that you can operate. And it's hard. People love to talk about daydreams in cloud cuckoo land, but it's really hard to have honest, frank discussions about the world ending down here. But once you do that, you have the boundaries that you can slowly modify, and you have a lot of leeway if people can just come to the table and have an honest, open discussion where everybody can contribute.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, when I've worked with my teams, what's a project plan? It's really nothing but a series of scheduled tasks that lay out hopefully realistic or practical goals. But when I introduce stretch goals to my team with some rewards, recognitions, competition, whatever it takes, if I introduce stretch goals, not impossible goals, but stretch goals, it's amazing to me how creative the team can become to get rid of some of the fluff out of the way they would do their work during the day and actually meet or beat those practical goal timelines that are represented in the schedule.
Isn't motivation a wonderful thing? It's wonderful. And once we realize that we don't have to be the expert, we can get out of the way.
Right.
When you get people together who have permission to actually do what people do best, which is brainstorming and analyzing and prioritizing and coming up with new ideas and new ways of doing things. If you can just get out of that way and protect them, they're gonna surprise you with their performance.
Well, and part of that is also, I think you used the term earlier, set your ego aside. Part of that too is that when you have a younger team looking up to you as the wise, experienced one, and if you begin to sort of set aside ideas or dismiss things, pretty soon they're going, well, he or she is the wise person. I don't have to contribute because they're just going to tell me what to do anyway. So I think from our perspective, we have to humble's the wrong word, but we have to put ourselves as a member of the team in those situations, and we have to concede to other people's better ideas. And that way you have that collaboration and that creativity to solve the problems.
Yeah, there are some things that cannot be bent. And we know what those are, right?
Yeah.
Where there are laws or policies or safety or whatever. There are things that you cannot negotiate. But it's surprising how much can be negotiable, especially when people come up with the opportunities, like you said, that actually is that minimum viable product or is the different way of looking at the solution.
Yeah. So I think in the last, say, 2 or 3 minutes that we have left, we've talked about urgency and value, and sometimes it's disruptive and sometimes it's working for us. How do we strike that balance between functionality or between urgency and value and the functionality that is brought by that value?
I'm gonna do a review real quickly. Number one, be curious. Number two, don't think you're the expert.
Right.
And number three, have some type of analytical method that you can use and you can actually structure the discussion in the room around that says, here's the benefits, here's the costs, and what side of the formula are we talking about here?
And I think the other thing is I've gone back over some of my blog posts and some of my writings. I find the word optimal being used a lot in my writings. So I think also in doing that value versus urgency, I think we look for optimal because we'll never get perfection, but we will get, and I even hate to use the phrase good enough, because when I deliver to my client, it's more than good enough, but it's optimal. At least that's my goal, is to have it.
Well, think about this, and I'll leave you with this. Let's actually use the definition of optimal as it is in quality management, okay? It's where the benefits of the quality activity equal the costs. It pays for itself. That's where you put enough quality into a project. So when you talk about urgency and optimal urgency, when you have a break even between the benefits and the costs of urgency, and it's paid for itself. And that's probably the best guidance I can give you.
Yeah. So when we deliver, for example, on the quality side, when we deliver, we're not delivering perfection, but we're delivering what's optimal for that client, makes it usable, functional, and delights them.
Yeah, we're not delivering an ISO 10,000. Here's your ISO 10. No, we're delivering a deliverable within all of the objectives and all of the needs and expectations. And that's one component.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that those project managers and budding project managers who have listened to us, even in some sort of sequence, I'm hoping they understand this quest for a transition between the human side or the people factors and now going into the more pragmatic or practical aspects of our arts and charts and our process level stuff. So I've enjoyed this transition conversation.
Yes, it has been fun. And I think as we get more and more into the concrete components that we can actually put measuring sticks against, I think we'll find ourselves still bringing in the human factor discussion.
Oh, just keep me from it.
Very good. So where can we find you this next week?
Well, as we, I think each week we say the same thing, right? LinkedIn.
Yeah, that's a primary focal point for myself as well.
Great. So until next week, when we start getting into a little more of the process.
Yes. Thanks again, Merv. And thanks everyone for tuning in on us.